concerns that now that the movement itself is gaining more visibility, that the movement itself probably needs some critical thought applied to it and to be decolonized itself to a certain extent. So what I've put on this slide are some components that are proposed by Dr. Opara. And there's a link down there if you want to see this fleshed out in great detail. But it's a really incredible piece that she gives voice to what needs to happen within the decolonization movement to prevent it from colonized. So I'll just go briefly through these 5 points here. So the first is that she recommends is getting comfortable with multiformity and fluidity. And what that means really is that the approach should be multifaceted and flexible enough to accommodate multiple definitions of decolonization. So the movement needs to be able to accommodate what decolonization actually means to different people and in different settings. So the second point is that decolonization should be grounded in the work of majority world leaders. And I think that speaks for itself. And again, you know, it just makes me very sensitive to the fact that as not a majority world leader, I should not be leading these efforts, but rather in solidarity and an accompaniment, finding ways to accompany my colleagues that are from the majority world. The third point is that it should be centered on intersectionality and interdependence. And this recognizes that health is inextricably linked to political and social structures, to environmental structures, things that move beyond the physical health of a person, which of course DGH clearly recognizes, but just bringing that to the forefront, that if we're working in global health and we want to decolonize global health, there are other structures that also need to be addressed that are part of that system. The fourth point is to emphasize a critical analysis of power. And I think this cannot be overemphasized. Knowing the power dynamic, naming the power dynamic, and critically analyzing the power dynamic is absolutely central if decolonization is to be successful. And then finally, her fifth point was to return to the source and prioritize it. And I do encourage you to read this in its totality, but this is her call to action to the majority peoples to take the lead on this, to really voice what has to happen for this movement to be successful, and for the rest of us to work in solidarity with the majority peoples to in their leadership of this movement. So next slide, please. So this this report, the Time to Decolonize Aid report, some people might be familiar with this already. This was published, I think at the end of 2020, early 2021, and it's the result of a global consultation that was convened to discuss structural racism within the aid and peace building movements, global aid and peace building movements, with the hope that it could start a conversation around how to truly decolonize aid. And it's the result of engagements with 158 participants from 49 countries, from 6 continents. And it's really a very important document, I think, because it provides descriptive content where concepts are defined, problems are outlined, but then also provides recommendations arising from the voices that are represented in this document. So it's a tool that has been really helpful to read, even if from outside the strict aid sector, there's a lot of cross-cutting themes that are reported here that I think apply to any type of international engagement. And it's something that we've been reading a lot in our sphere, in our professional lives, and encouraging especially junior staff to have conversations around the topics that are raised here and to think critically about some of these concepts as they pertain to our work in global health, both on the program side as well as on the research side. Next slide, please. So how can we act on these principles of accompaniment and decolonization in our engagements with global health programs and in research settings? These are two questions that I ask myself a lot. And there are 2 points here that I'll elaborate on in my upcoming slides. First is to center our actions on accompaniment. And that's accompaniment in its truest form and trying to define what that means in our engagements. But then also recognizing that it's a process, not an endpoint, and that there are both systemic and individual components to this. So next slide, please. So I'll start with global health programs. And with this, I propose a principal guiding question, which is, where does the power lie? That needs to be forefront in our minds as we're thinking critically about these dynamics, and being conscious of where the power lies, where we lie on that continuum, and where our colleagues lie. And within global health programs, and when I say global health programs, I suppose I should define that a bit. By this, I mean large international NGOs, large governmental initiatives, such as the Global Fund for AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, just very large program-focused global health activities. So on the previous slide, I said there are both systemic and individual components to this. And what I'm proposing here are just some questions to be thinking about with respect to both of those dimensions. So on the systemic side, we need to think about who defines the problem, who decides that there's something wrong that needs to be addressed. Who is that? What is that? Where are they based? Where does the power lie? Where are they on that continuum? Who makes the funding decisions? Who decides which programs get the funds? Where are those funds originating? Who makes the call as to which activities within the programs get funding? And then there's also this dichotomy between lead organizations and local organizations. So especially in the international NGO world, there will be the lead organization or the parent organization, but then they'll also have local organizations that they fund, but really, where does the power lie there? Does the local organization really have the autonomy to do what they feel is best, or are they beholden to the lead organization? So moving to the individual components, who is considered an expert? And this is something I think that cuts over to the research side as well. Experts come in many shapes and sizes. This also harkens back to the West is best prevailing philosophy. Expertise is pretty narrowly defined still and depends on Western definitions of what that is. So as an individual, who is considered an expert, and being conscious of the expertise that people bring to the table. The next is, how do you know if your work is impactful? In the simplest terms, lots of global health practitioners, the common denominator is they want to do good. So how do you know if you're doing good? Who tells you if you're doing good? How do you know if your work is having an impact? Who defines that impact? And then also, how do you interact with colleagues? On the simplest scale, is there interactions where you are seeing them as equals? Is it something that you truly see them as equal contributors, equal experts? And I was really struck yesterday with Irma's example from the CCC and the use of local experts to conduct the trainings. And that's exactly reflective of what I'm trying to portray here, where people that have the expertise, that come from the community, that know what the community needs. It's making sure that those are the voices and the leaders of these programs, and that those individuals are allowed to be the experts and the leaders of these programs. Okay, so next slide, please. So moving on, one more up. Yes, that one. So research settings, it looks a lot like the previous slide, because I do think also for this, the principal guiding question is still, where does the power lie? And having that being forefront in the mind when thinking about accompaniment in research settings is critical. So, and when I say research settings, what I mean here is in the more traditional academic sense or research institute sense, conducting public health research in this case, that's what I'm most familiar with, or basic science research. So on the systemic side, much like in global health programs, who's setting the research agenda and who's receiving the funding? Which labs get the big grants? Which universities, which institutes get the big grants to do the work? That's critical, and it's one of the most obvious examples of colonialism in the research community. Another aspect I wanted to raise is that of what's referred to as quote unquote overheads in research grants. And anyone in the academic world will know what this is. It's money that is put on top of the amount of a grant to cover other costs, overheads. And most Western academic or research institutes put a nice hefty charge of overheads, 50, 60% overheads onto something. But there's really a duality here, because what's often cited to me as the reason that a research institute or academic group in a disease endemic country can't be the direct recipient of a grant is because of fears of corruption. And I would argue that, overheads are just sort of the way the Western world has legitimized that to a certain degree. So that's a particular topic for me that that I think is pretty pretty wrong in the way research funding decisions are currently made. But then another example also is reagent costs. So people doing basic science research, if they want to do bench research, they have to buy reagents and supplies to be able to do that in their laboratories. And the cost for those reagents and supplies in many non-Western laboratory settings can be 5 or 10 times the cost of what they would be here in the US, for instance. And that right there puts up a barrier that limits the amount of basic science research that can be conducted in some of these non-Western laboratory settings. And that's another area that we're trying to work with to lower those costs so that that is no longer a barrier, because it just perpetuates a cycle of dependency on a lab in a country that isn't subject to those exceptionally high fees on reagents and supplies. And then on the individual level, there's the concept of the principal investigator, or PI, versus the quote unquote local PI. And this harkens back to the funding again, where typically a PI from a Western institution will receive the big grant, and then they send on a bit to the local PI, who is actually based in the non-Western country and is overseeing all of the work. It's another duality that is very prevalent and quite unnecessary from my perspective. Who presents the data? There's all these wonderful international conferences, and people are able to present the research and the data, even in publications as well. Who's the first author? Who's the last author? Who's seen as the person that really did the work? Being conscious of that. And then again, how do you interact with colleagues? Are you coming from the perspective of Western dominance? And again, where does the power lie? Being conscious of that. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to give an actual example of something that recently happened. So this is an excerpt from a letter that appeared in Nature Medicine earlier this year. And it was from a group of African scientists that all worked in various parts of malaria research. And the letter was entitled "Open Letter to International Funders of Science and Development in Africa." And what I've excerpted here, I think, illustrates the heart of what they're saying. So they say, in 2017, the USA, UK, and Canada collectively spent US $1.1 billion on malaria development aid, which includes research funding. It appears that once Global Fund contributions are removed, 81% of funding was used to support institutions in the funding country. Okay, that's USA, UK, or Canada. And 18% went to non-governmental organizations, probably based in high-income countries. That leaves just 1% of malaria funding available to local in-country research institutions. We recognize that the current funding structures create an imbalance of power and a monopoly that favors Western institutions and is derived in part from the perpetuation of the inequities in access to funding, with policies that lock out African institutions. These structural inequalities must be examined and they must end. And this was this year. This is not something that happened long ago. This happened now. So in light of this, we have our colleagues, malaria researchers in Africa, sending this open letter. So what can we do? And I suggest we listen and we act in solidarity. And that's how we can try to accompany them in this journey to correct this structural inequity that they so nicely detail in their letter. And I've included the reference here for those who wish to see the full letter. And then there was actually some good response to it also from key players on the global stage, which it's a hopeful sign that we really might be at a point in our work as at least in the world of malaria, that we might be able to try to meaningfully address some of this. But also we have to be very conscious of some of the points I raised earlier about decolonization. The colonizer should not be in charge of decolonizing. We need to truly listen and truly act in solidarity. So I think I'll close there. If you just want to go to the next slide, please. So I realize it's been more of a stream of consciousness, just outlining some of the thoughts I had on these topics, but there's certainly a lot more to be said about this, a lot more to be thought about this. But I do think there are practical ways that we can try to enact an accompaniment in our interactions, in our various professional roles, our personal roles, etc. So I just wanted to propose 3 points for ongoing discussion, either now or in the future. So the first is, how do you define accompaniment? I've told you how I define it, but I think there's lots of different ways and different facets to it that mean different things to different people. And it can take different forms in different settings. And I'm curious to learn from you all how you define it, how you enact it, and learn from that. The second is, what are ways we can adopt a posture of accompaniment in our interactions, organizationally, professionally, and personally? This is the practical aspect, learning from each other and how we've addressed these situations head on in our different settings. And then finally, this is more for DGH as a group. Where does DGH position itself in the decolonization movement? What is our role? We've heard liberation medicine mentioned a lot. We had Lanny's talk on the very first day about that. It's been at the core of DGH since our founding. That's a really, the ideas of liberation and decolonization are really closely tied. What can we take from our experiences and use for this moment when decolonization is something that is gaining a lot of attention? How can we make it meaningful? How can we root that and our engagement in the decolonization movement in our lived experience as developing ideas around liberation medicine and the accompaniment of our partner communities in practicing liberation medicine? So I will end there. I've probably left more questions than anything, but I think that's really the point, is it's a journey, not a destination. And I look forward to the dialogue that comes out of this, even if not today, but further on down the road. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lenhart. That was really wonderful. We have some time for some questions for Dr. Lenhart. There have been some questions typed out in the chat. And let's see, Patty, would you be able to read some of those questions? Or if any of the original askers of the questions want to read them out loud, they could ask them now.
Sí, creo que Juan Manuel hizo unas preguntas. Juan Manuel, ¿quiere usted hacer las preguntas que puso en el chat o quiere que se las lea yo?
Sí, sí, léala usted.
Ok. Una de las preguntas que hizo Juan Manuel, no un acompañamiento con mente colonizadora y lo que implica la mente colonizadora que uno mismo tiene dentro del cerebro. Juan Manuel, ¿esos son como comentarios o preguntas?
Preguntas.
Ok,
2 preguntas.
2 preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Juan Manuel. No sé si podrías elaborar un poco más en detalle lo que estaba pensando acerca de lo que implica la mente colonizadora que uno mismo tiene dentro del cerebro. No sé si entiendo bien.
Cuando hablo de... Es que este tema es bien importante sobre la mente colonizadora, ¿verdad? Y la pregunta es déjame ver cómo lo escribí en el chat, ahorita te digo. Okay. La pregunta es, no un acompañamiento con mente colonizadora, o sea, si el voluntario o cualquier persona en cualquier trabajo y en cualquier campo, la pregunta es no hay que ir con una mente colonizadora, ¿verdad? ¿Y cómo identificamos esa mente colonizadora? Por lo que llevamos dentro del cerebro. ¿Me explico?
Sí, sí.
Lo estabas explicando, pero en este tema tenemos que por ejemplo, ¿tenemos mente colonizadora cada uno de nosotros?
Sí.
Sí, claro.
Es ser consciente de eso.
Ajá, es lo que dijiste hace rato. Hacer conciencia de eso para que yo no sea colonizado ni colonizador, como establece la pedagogía del oprimido.
Exacto.
¿Sí?
Y este proceso de concientización es clave.
Sí, y hay que tocar el tema y hay que proponer en el futuro un conversatorio, aunque no nos podamos juntar físicamente, pero en un conversatorio en línea podemos hablar sobre este tema.
Eso sería magnífico.
Sí.
Sí, gracias, Juan Manuel.
Sí. Okay. Gracias a ti. Muy buena tu reflexión, tu análisis y reflexión. Me gustó. Dale.
There are some other comments that are in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to pose or comments?
Well, I was just thinking, this is Carol, that colonization isn't just a matter of US versus the world or West versus non-West, but it's intrinsic in the US because the US was colonized at its inception. And I think as someone who's worked in the US and in Mexico and Salvador, in some ways, what the work that inspired me was that, like when I was in Mexico, I worked with curanderos, and that the family doctors in Mexico that worked, like in Producep, working with promoters, it was very collaborative. But here in the US, we don't have that. We don't pair with Native Americans, or with, like my husband is a Yoruban practitioner and drummer. We denigrate those healing systems in our own healthcare system. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist where people are labeled psychotic because of their traditional healing practices. So I think, like, even before looking at colonization abroad, we need to also examine colonization with our own country and how it's perpetuated and actually killed and damaged people since the inception of our country.
That's a really important point, Carol. Yeah, and I think how structural racism really is the enabling factor here too. And I think what you just said also touches on my point about who are the experts and where we say the expertise lies, and how that's tied up with power as well. Thank you for that.
Doctora Lenhart, Andrea has a question. I'll read it to you in Spanish.
Okay.
¿Ves un puente entre la propuesta de acompañamiento y las propuestas de planeamiento participativo y de las metodologías participativas y de la medicina centrada en la persona y los proyectos terapéuticos singulares de la clínica ampliada?
Bueno, sí. Creo que, bueno, el planeamiento participativo y las metodologías participativas sí son muy pertinentes y componentes del acompañamiento, pero también, bueno, me hace pensar en mis experiencias con la teología de liberación y bueno, los ciclos de praxis, desarrollar las ideas en conjunto, implementarlos y reflexionarlos, y así siguen mejorando, bueno, las metodologías y las prácticas en una manera participativa. Y bueno, sobre la medicina central en la persona, estoy mirando aquí en el chat, y los proyectos terapéuticos, eso no soy clínica, entonces, y no tengo mucha experiencia en este aspecto, pero seguro que hay otros aquí en la reunión que tienen perspectivas para compartir sobre ese tema. Veo la mano de Irma.
Mi mano. Muchas gracias, Audrey, por tu presentación. Es muy pertinente en estos momentos del trabajo con las comunidades para ese acompañamiento más efectivo, para que no solamente sea un trabajo para curar, digamos, en las ramas, sino para ir desde la raíz. Y esa parte de la investigación falta mucho en nuestros países. Pero esta propuesta me llama mucho la atención para poder trabajar, para involucrar a la gente de la comunidad en este proceso. Que no solo vengan las personas, digamos que expertas, ¿verdad?, para hacer este tipo de investigaciones, sino darle herramientas también a la comunidad para que ellos sean partícipes, ¿sí?, con reflexión. O sea, no solamente enseñarles, mira, toma esta herramienta, haz la encuesta y cuenta y punto, ¿no? O sea, no, sino llegar a una parte de análisis y de reflexión, el por qué se va a hacer este tipo de intervención y para qué. Y una vez que se haga, entonces darle el seguimiento para el siguiente paso, para la transformación, ¿verdad? Si no nos vamos a quedar solamente en bonitos análisis, como hay muchísimos análisis muy buenos, pero no están poniéndose en la práctica, ¿no? Para transformar a la gente. Entonces sería muy interesante que algunos proyectos o programas se incluyan esta parte de la investigación, pero desde las comunidades. Entonces, pues felicidades por este enfoque que has dado, que es muy bueno y hace falta. Hace falta investigación en nuestros países. Gracias.
No, gracias a ti, Irma. Y me encanta esta idea de desarrollar oportunidades para que las comunidades sean más activos y involucrados como contrapartes en las actividades de investigación.
Sí, porque además es parte de la teoría de lo que nosotros estamos promoviendo, de la medicina de la liberación. ¿Sí? O sea, la medicina de la liberación precisamente es eso. Es que las personas desde las comunidades empiecen a generar, ¿verdad? Con análisis y reflexión, su transformación. Gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Me gusto de verte.
Are there any other questions or comments for Dr. Lenhart? Okay, not seeing any. I'd just like to offer our thanks again to you for this great presentation. And we will move into the final presentation of the day, which is a presentation from Dr. Irma Cruz Nava. And she has some pre-recorded slides, and then we will have a time for a question and answer following the presentation. Thank you again, Dr. Lenhart.
El lucro farmacéutico de la medicina, medicina holística alternativa, área de salud, comunidades campesinas en camino. Les saluda Irma Julieta Cruz. Ir hacia la salud significa vivenciar la hermosa posibilidad de recuperar nuestro sentimiento de pertenencia a la naturaleza. Salud de los ecosistemas, Sandra Isabel Payán y Julio Monsalvo, 2009, colección Alta Alegremia. Quiero iniciar esta participación con este concepto. Todo lo que nos sucede es expresión de lo que le está sucediendo al universo entero. Debemos concebir a la salud como salud de los ecosistemas, como un todo integrado en nosotros mismos. Estamos viviendo una gran extensión de la especie humana, a la cual debemos atender. Lo más sorprendente es que como comunidad, como humanidad, con todos los avances científicos y tecnológicos de años en el mundo, tenemos la capacidad de marcar la diferencia. Pero, ¿qué es lo que nos impide acelerar el proceso de transformación para lograr este cambio en nuestra vida? Vivimos en un contexto en donde el mundo se ve dominado por la cultura del mercado. Es el resultado de la globalización. Sus efectos se ven reflejados a todo nivel. El sobreendeudamiento del país llevó a que el Estado mexicano deje que los dueños del capital inviertan con sus condiciones, llegando así a la privatización. A los campesinos no les dan oportunidades suficientes para impulsar una adecuada producción que satisfaga sus necesidades y mucho menos a promover la agroecología. El alto grado de corrupción que se vive domina todas las estructuras. Así es casi imposible mejorar las condiciones de vida de sus habitantes. Los gobiernos se quedan cortos en sus esfuerzos por la situación tan compleja y por tener una cultura de años de corrupción. Las personas caen en la trampa de comprar, aunque no lo necesiten ni tengan suficiente dinero, por moda, por cambio de temporada, por quedar bien en sociedad. Se sabe en general que debemos cuidar el medio ambiente, pero en la práctica no se hace lo suficiente. Se sigue utilizando agroquímicos de empresas transnacionales para los cultivos, que empeoran la situación. También se utilizan productos que no son biodegradables, a pesar que se sabe de los daños que esto ocasiona. ¿Por qué? Porque afecta a intereses económicos de grandes empresas. En el área de la salud, se introducen tratamientos con medicamentos farmacéuticos que en la mayoría de las veces son utilizados de manera indiscriminada, por tiempos prolongados y provocan efectos secundarios que las personas desconocen, trayendo consecuencias en ocasiones graves. Hay una tendencia fuerte a la automedicación para atender problemas comunes, debido a la falta de médicos en zonas con mayor índice de pobreza. No pueden pagar una consulta médica o comprar los medicamentos. Es importante atender la falta de educación en salud en la población en general. México es un país que muestra una sociedad que en medio de su diversidad existen valores culturales sólidos, como la solidaridad, el amor a la tierra, la transmisión de saberes a las nuevas generaciones, su gastronomía, conservar su lengua originaria. Según datos oficiales, en México se hablan 68 lenguas indígenas. En Oaxaca, el 34% de la población hablan 16 lenguas indígenas. Y en la región del Istmo de Tehuantepec viven 6 grupos indígenas. Aunque por otro lado, la introducción de costumbres ajenas genera un proceso de transculturación que pone en una situación de desventaja a la población al ir perdiendo su identidad, trayendo por consecuencia agudización de los problemas en las comunidades. La práctica médica es desde su esencia la profesión más noble, porque se dedica al servicio de los demás, al ayudar a sanar, a no sentir dolor, a aprender a solucionar sus emociones, a estar bien con uno mismo y con los demás. En este sentido, los médicos tenemos la obligación moral e intelectual de seguir buscando las mejores alternativas de curación para los pacientes. Deberíamos de buscar todas las formas posibles de curación, no importa de qué tipo de medicina o terapia se trate, siempre y cuando ayude a las personas y no les provoque daño alguno. Sin embargo, la medicina mercantilizada trata al paciente como una mercancía, como centro de lucro. En 1975, Iván Illich, en su libro Némesis Médica, señala que la medicina institucionalizada ha llegado a convertirse en una grave amenaza para la salud, debido, entre otros factores, a la colonización médica, al monopolio médico y paramédico, además del carácter político en donde la medicina se convierte en un objeto para la acción política. Y tristemente, aún se vive esta situación. Esto ha generado una tendencia a que las personas pierdan el poder de curarse a sí mismas y también de moldear su ambiente. Los avances en la tecnología de la medicina se encuentran al servicio de la industria y no del ser humano. la atención en hospitales públicos es muy deficiente. La pandemia por COVID-19 ha puesto en evidencia el bajo grado de educación para la salud que tiene la población desde hace décadas. No se siguen las medidas de prevención para enfrentar esta enfermedad y la atención a los pacientes es ineficiente. En general, cuando se saturan los hospitales públicos, las personas van a los privados, pero la gran mayoría de las personas no cuentan con los recursos económicos suficientes para recibir atención de calidad. En muchas ocasiones, las personas no acuden a ningún servicio médico, se quedan en casa con las consecuencias que ya sabemos. En este contexto, desde el marco de la medicina de la liberación, es de suma importancia hacer reflexiones profundas acerca de lo que debemos hacer con relación a la salud. Debemos iniciar con el cuidado del medio ambiente, promover el cultivo de plantas medicinales sin agroquímicos y conocer sus propiedades curativas. Es necesario que las comunidades rescaten las especies propias de su región y promover intercambio de plantas. Podríamos decir que esto no es real en las ciudades, pero debemos fomentar lazos solidarios entre comunidades, entre diferentes sociedades, para que haya un impacto incluyendo a las universidades, fomentando la investigación, logrando así que a futuro se tengan productos herbolarios de calidad, a precio accesible y con efectos secundarios mínimos. ¿Por qué iniciar con las plantas medicinales? Considero que al tomarlo como eje de trabajo, vamos a incidir en el amor hacia la tierra, en volver a nuestras raíces culturales, cuidando más el medio ambiente, porque además que nos da alimentación, nos da salud, nos da paz, tranquilidad. Pero no es suficiente. De esta manera vamos a fomentar la ayuda mutua entre comunidades, entre vecinos, y así combatimos el individualismo. Estoy hablando desde los países latinos, en donde nuestros ancestros ya utilizaban las plantas medicinales como parte de su vida. Las universidades que preparan médicos, enfermeras y cualquier persona que se dedique a la salud deberían enseñar la utilización de todas las formas posibles de curación. Tenemos la obligación de explorar, de investigar, de aprender nuevas formas de tratamientos alternativos y combinarlo con los pacientes para atender sus problemas de salud. Para finalizar la presentación diré: es tan importante aprender para tratar pacientes, como enseñar a cualquier persona que desea aprender para enseñar y dar servicio, ojalá, a cualquier persona que lo requiera. Muchas gracias y seguimos en lucha.
Muchas gracias, Irma.
Gracias a todos por escuchar. Por supuesto que no solamente en México hay nuestras raíces culturales, en Latinoamérica, en todo el mundo. En todo el mundo tenemos raíces culturales, aún en Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Y debemos de rescatarlas. Creo que esto va a ser parte de que salvemos el mundo. Y pues sí, estoy convencida de que sí lo podemos hacer. Ante los problemas que nos enfrentamos, pues tenemos que unirnos más para ubicarlos y poder hacer lo que sea necesario para transformarlos, ¿no? Esta asamblea es una buena oportunidad para continuar animándonos y seguir en esa lucha.
Gracias. Are there any questions or comments for Irma? I see some comments in the chat. Andrea says, gracias Irma, te admiro mucho, me encanta tu trabajo, me encanta lo que me enseña. And Mary Frances says, Irma, estás exactamente correcta en cualquier rincón del mundo.
Sí.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Any other comments or questions for Irma?
Bueno, yo quiero finalizar nada más diciendo de que los comentarios a veces aquí está bien, pero debemos de llevarlos a nuestros centros de trabajo, a nuestras comunidades, a nuestros equipos. Ahí tenemos que seguir comentando, analizando para generar esas herramientas, ponerlas en la práctica, medirlas si están bien y seguir trabajando. Esto es lo que sugiero.
Sí, gracias. Hay otra pregunta. Elsie Iglesias pregunta, Andrea pregunta, pregunto si ves el trabajo con la tierra y las plantas para la salud mental.
Así es, realmente estamos trabajando la salud mental con los centros de escucha y sí puedo decir con la práctica que hemos tenido que las plantas es algo maravilloso para trabajar la relajación mental, la situación de estrés que viven en las comunidades por las violencias, incluso por la pandemia del COVID. Quiero decir que en la ciudad se ve un poco más, en las ciudades grandes. Aquí en la región se ve muy poco esa parte del encierro en las casas, ¿no? El estrés es diferente aquí. Es más por una situación económica difícil o por la violencia. Pero las plantas, la medicina natural, ¿verdad? Ingerida, pero la naturaleza, ¿verdad? Caminar descalzo, por ejemplo, en el jardín, atender las plantas y relacionarse con ellas, hablar con las plantas, da mucha tranquilidad emocional y mucha relajación. Y eso es lo que nosotros promovemos con los pacientes, con muy buenos resultados además.
Okay, great. Thank you for those questions. Okay, any other commentary? Okay, good. Okay, pues Irma, muchísimas gracias. And thank you to everyone else for attending this conference this weekend. And to our presenters, especially, thank you for your time. This type of conference is only possible with the participation of many people. And it really does take a whole village to pull this off. So thank you again. I think with this, we will close the program. The board will have an hour of board meeting following this in our standard room. And Lanny, it looks like you have a comment you'd like to add. I think now would be a good time.
Okay, I want to say thank you to everyone. It doesn't have to be the last word, and I hope it's not, but I do want to say thank you to everyone who has participated in today's conference. I want to ask if everyone is okay with it to consider trying to interact with other folks here so that we can maintain and increase our momentum in changing systemic racism and fighting racism and colonialism and promoting human rights and human dignity. There's so many people that worked hard to make this conference happen. We can't recognize everybody. I think you can see them, the folks that have been here. We've mentioned before that Fiona has worked really hard, and you've seen that, and Patty and Shirley and Alex, and many others as well. This is going to be I don't know about the last year ever, but certainly the last for now of Alex being the president of Doctors for Global Health. Alex has some major good family news and responsibilities. And I just want to say a few words about Alex. My mom, Renee Smith, a DGH a person from long back who's still, of course, here and working with us. She mentioned, Alex, that where she met you was at Radio Victoria in El Salvador. She remembers very distinctly meeting you with your backpack on, and just kind of your presence. I think she even recognizes your technological expertise, just kind of along with your sincerity and love coming from you. We were just talking about you last night. Your ears perhaps were burning, so were your 2-year-olds, no doubt, and Libby's. And so I want everyone listening to realize what you've been doing. Usually the person who's Doctors for Global Health president has a huge network of folks who are working as the technical experts, and the people that are doing human rights, and the folks that are planning the General Assembly, and you yourself have been among that group of technical experts. We all know that you are trained in the preventive and curative health of computers, both PCs and Apples, along with the health of human beings. I want to point out, and of course, I'm not married to you, so I can't really be the one to say, but I want to point out that from my perspective, you have been working as what Che Guevara would call the new man. You've really tried to prioritize family and in a way that I find very inspiring. And you've made DGH part of your family within that prioritization. And I can't express adequately how much I appreciate who you are and what you've given to this group. So I just want to say that, Alex has been working super hard this last year to keep Doctors for Global Health as an entity, as well as doing the technological work necessary, the website and everything else. And so I want to ask everyone to say thank you in your own way. And Alex is rotating off the board this session, as I said, to be with to really concentrate on his family and also on his work in the upcoming professional aspect of healing work. I want to thank everyone else that has been stepping up, especially this last year plus, when Doctors for Global Health has faced some real challenges. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's participated in this General Assembly. Second virtual General Assembly. We're going to, in the future, actually try to incorporate the virtual aspect of General Assemblies so that people from any corner of the world fighting injustice, as Che Guevara noted, we must do. People from any corner of the world who are able to get the bandwidth, literally, to be present can join us. And we're going to really work for that. So thank you, everyone. I hope that we have a few more comments here, but I've learned so much from today and yesterday's General Assembly, from the comments as well as the presenters. And going back, thank you to the organizers of this General Assembly, and anyone listening who feels you would be able to step up and work with us more this coming year. That would be just wonderful. You must all know that we've had a difficult time with the last with the last person who was president of the United States, and the terrible mentality that that person tried to grow. And we have so much work to do going forward. So again, thank you. And thank you all for the inspiration. Now we have a Doctors for Global Health board meeting, and a lot more work to do to try to facilitate such that our community partners can continue to inspire us the way that they do with our accompaniment, and vice versa. Thank you.
But I'd like to add a few words. Again, my appreciation and thanks for everybody who has registered and participated. I have personally gone through every single registration on Eventbrite and entered the data that we had into our system. Many of you, it was only email and your name, which we're appreciative of. But one of the things that we have done over the years at the end of our face-to-face General Assemblies has been to send out an email notice to all participants asking you to either agree to sharing your contact information, or you can opt out of it if you have chosen not to do that. We haven't even discussed really about doing that kind of thing with the virtual General Assembly. And I think maybe that's something, you know, the board can discuss at our meeting. But one of the things we've been pleased about over the years, and you heard a lot about it through comments throughout the General Assembly, is the networking that's happened among board members, among participants. You know, there were years we used to sit around board meetings and say, oh, I met you in El Salvador. I met you in El Salvador. And the majority of us, I met Laudrey Lenhart in El Salvador, and Alex and Lanny. And so Patty has done a great job throughout the General Assembly of putting notes in the chat. If you haven't signed up with your full contact information, please go to our website and do that. And I hope that most of you who we only have name and email address for will do that. But the idea of sharing information, if that appeals to you, again, we would not do it unless we got the okay from you, but we can't share where you are in the world unless you give us that information. But for people who did share some of that, I can just tell you that we've had participation certainly from the US, El Salvador, Mexico, also from Brazil, from Nicaragua, from Canada, from India, from Pakistan. Those are the countries that I know of, and there may be more. So please help us in that, and have a way to connect in the future and keep the work going. Thank you.
Just a couple more things. Thank you so much for our interpreters, for Judith, Custodio, and Karen Ordóñez. Really, that was a highly professional and very helpful accompaniment in every sense. And I also want to give another shout out to someone who that I met in Atlanta, I think, which is Patty Medina, and your really strong work putting this, helping to put this year's General Assembly together. I thank you, everyone, and we'll have some more work coming up. And before I finish, I just want to thank you, Linda Sharp, for your extraordinary accompaniment of Linnea Capps in the last part of her lived life, and then as she continues to live through us, what you just put together today and what you continue to do, and in the many other ways that you continue as a former DGH president to accompany our work here. Thank you.
And I wanted to say that sometimes I think people feel that there are only a few ways to participate in DGH, either to become a board member or to go to volunteer with one of the partner community. But I think there are a lot of other ways. And I know it personally. I'm not a board member, but I think we need more people to do discrete things that they are best skilled to do and motivated to do. And I think we should make, as an organization, if we have contact information for people, we can come up with ideas of creative ways to to do the work of the organization. And also I want to thank Alex and for you being very available as a president. It's been really great. Thank you for your support.
Well, thanks everyone. It's been a real pleasure to be a part of DGH for more than a decade so far. And we are expecting our second baby now. And so, as Lanny mentioned, I am stepping off the board for the time being, and we'll see what the future brings. Okay, any other comments before we close? Okay, I see Fiona is back. So I do think it's appropriate, just again, it's been said multiple times, but I really do think we need to acknowledge Fiona and her extreme hard work over this last year in really being the linchpin for getting this GA organized. As we've said, it has been a team of many people, but Fiona has really been the one who's held everybody together. So thank you again, Fiona.
Well, thanks for that. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for all of your help. I definitely could not have done it on my own, and I'm really appreciative of all the attendees, and I hope this was a good, inspiring, and informative experience. Definitely being a part of DGH, what's been super beautiful for me has been the community, so I hope everybody finds that here as well.
Okay, with that, we will close, and thank you all for your participation.